A musician walked into a church in Montreal, sang a few songs, and walked out with a $2,500 fine and a national controversy trailing behind him for several days right now. I'm sure you've seen that on the news. That's Sean Feucht, an American, an evangelical worship leader, a politically outspoken person, and now Canada's latest test case in the never-ending battle between public safety and freedom of speech. Now, I want to strip this down to brass tacks for a second and determine, did Sean Feucht break the law, or did the law bend to break him? Feucht planned several events across eastern Canada, from Halifax, Charlottetown, Gatineau, and even Quebec City, and all the way to the west coast. The tour was promoted as Christian revival, but municipal officials saw something entirely different from everyone else. They saw cultural wars. They saw inflammatory anti-LGBTQ statements that the guy had made in the past, and the potential for public unrest. Now, one by one, permits were revoked. They cited safety, Canadian values, and inclusion. Now, I want you to note those three things. In Montreal, Feucht performed anyways at a private church. According to the news, there was no riot, no mass unrest, but there was a smoke bomb that was thrown into the church. A man got arrested, but a fine was slapped on the church, a $2,500 fine. But from the mayors, it was a collective shrug that Feucht's message does not align with our Canadian values. Now, I want you to pause there for a second. Again, there are 3 major reasons which I wanted to bear in mind why they canceled the permits for these events: safety, Canadian values, and inclusion. I'm going to get back to those 30 points in a second here, because Canada doesn't just have speech laws, it has speech filters. And I'll tell you why I say so. Because under Section 319 of the Criminal Code in Canada, it's illegal to willfully promote hatred against any identifiable groups, either by their race, their religion, their sexual orientation, or whatever. But here's the thing. Our Constitution also guarantees freedom of expression under Section 2B of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which I have here before me this time. I'm going to read a portion of that to you. But that sounds great, right? Except the fact that the Charter is a conditional statement. And here is why I say so. Because Section 1 allows the government to limit those freedoms as long as the limits is deemed reasonable and demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. I just read that to you. Now, the translation of that is that you're free to speak unless we have a good enough reason to stop you. Now, the courts will decide what counts as good enough speech. Let's look at the precedent here. I did a bit of research about this as well. In R.V. Kingstra case, a teacher in Alberta taught his students anti-Semitic conspiracies. The Supreme Court upheld his conviction that free speech does not protect speech that dehumanizes people. In a second case, in Saskatchewan versus Watcott, a Christian activist handed out flyers condemning homosexuality with Bible verses, and this happened just some years back. The court ruled some of that content crossed the line into hate speech, not because it was religious, but because it was vilifying a certain group of people. So where does that leave Sean Feucht? Well, he is very outspoken, he is political, but by Canadian legal standards, he hasn't been charged with promoting hatred, not at all. He's been denied permits and fined under a municipal code, not for hate speech in this case, but because of some other reasons. Now let's cross over to the southern border. In the United States, the First Amendment is an ironclad, and I'll tell you why I say so. And this is my interpretation. You can correct me in the comment section. Even hate speech in the United States is protected unless it incites imminent violence, in my opinion. Let's cite this classic case, which is the Brandenburg versus Ohio in 1969. I looked that one up as well. A Klan member spewing racist garbage on camera, which is protected speech. Why? Because it doesn't trigger immediate lawless action. Now, if Sean Feucht had held these concerts in Florida or in Texas, cities couldn't shut him down based off of his ideology or personal beliefs. If they tried to do that, a judge would likely have struck the case down as a viewpoint discrimination against him and totally unconstitutional. But it's a totally different ball game here in Canada because cities here operate under broad administrative discretion. And I'll tell you why. You want to hold a public event, for instance, you need a permit. You want a permit? You need to meet zoning codes for fire safety, insurance, and even now, increasingly, the city's subjective values. That's the crack in the Canadian system. These municipalities didn't just say that these events were going to get crowded or rowdy. They said explicitly the artist's message does not align with our Canadian values of inclusion. Now you go read that again and determine if that is true or not. This wasn't a neutral call for safety. It was a moral veto on what events could hold. You remember the 3 reasons I gave earlier for canceling the permit? The safety reason, Canadian values, and inclusion. You'd think that inclusion would mean tolerance about shared spaces, accommodating different beliefs and coexistence in society, but that's not how it feels anymore. A Christian worship event gets cancelled in city after city because a musician had ordered his personal beliefs against the LGBTQ lifestyle in the past. That's his own conviction. Now, it sounds like inclusion now means ideological alignment. You can be included, but only if you agree with the certain things. You can speak, but only if your values are pre-approved in accord with the municipality standards of approved speeches. With respect to concerns about Canadian values, it sends a clear message to Canadians that faith-based perspectives, however unpopular they are becoming these days in certain circles, they are actually now viewed as hate. The other day we saw the police officer who said something similar to that on the news as well. Plus, these traditional values are no longer representative of Canadian values. Hence, you're not allowed to sing as a musician in a public space because of your traditional values. Plus, he is aligned with Trump and the MAGA movement. And I guess also according to Canadian standard, Trump and the MAGA movement don't necessarily accord with Canadian values. But what could really happen? Why should anyone be concerned about this? Canadians may not feel safe around you, they say, around Feucht or anyone who holds these contrary values, hence permits are cancelled. Now you may think that Feucht's views are fringe or, offensive. Well, fine, you have the right to your own opinion. But here is a principle. When governments get into the business of defining which speech is acceptable, they do not just regulate, they curate. We're creating a precedent for state-approved speech where legal access to public space depends not just on conduct, but on ideological alignment. This is how we end up with municipal morality that is being baked into governance and also might actually get baked into our constitution sooner than later. And that morality that is used as a yardstick is actually selective. It's politically flavored. It's not stable as well. Today is Sean Feucht. Tomorrow it could be a feminist critic of gender theory. Next week it could be a black intellectual who questions DEI orthodoxy. Because once inclusion becomes a litmus test, it stops being inclusive actually. That's the problem inherent with inclusion. It becomes a weapon that could be used against anyone. So let's cut through the noise one more second here. What's more dangerous is a Sean Feucht singing in a church or a society so uncomfortable with dissent that he uses permits and bylaws to excommunicate other ideology in society. This isn't about protecting people from harm, as it were. It's about protecting dominant narratives from societal friction, from being challenged by you or by me. And if we keep walking down this path, the danger in it is that we'll soon find out that the greatest threat to diversity isn't extremism. It's actually forced agreement. Forced agreement is the biggest biggest danger to diversity. Now, I'm not here to defend Sean Feucht's political stance, not at all, and I hope I've not done that in this few minutes of ranting here. I'm here to defend your right and my right to say things that are not fashionable, not popular anymore, or may not be endorsed by a mayor's communications department, because Canada doesn't actually need more filters. Canada needs more courage, more courageous people, the courage to tolerate speech that we don't agree with or like, because that's the real price of living in a free society, in my opinion. Now, I talked about something very related to this in a recent video addressing the mass migration problems in the West, where Western political systems are also slowly or radically being taken over by people who did not integrate into these nations that they've come into, who are also occupying leadership at all levels. And they're running leaderships like in their home countries where they fled from, where we welcome people from around the world, but we shouldn't import the censorship that they fled from. Now go check out that monologue. I wouldn't get back into all that. I'll leave you with this question though. Should cities have the right to deny you a platform simply because your values don't match theirs? And do you also think that Sean Feucht broke the law, or did the law bend to break him? I want to know what you think about that in the comment section. I will read all the comments and answer all of them, and also subscribe to the channel. I will see you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.